So there I was, sitting in the most pretentious conference room in the known galaxy, watching a collection of alien diplomats treat me like I was some kind of cosmic kindergartner. Ambassador Jake Morrison, they called me. My friends back home called me Tank, mostly because I had all the diplomatic subtlety of a bulldozer when I needed to. But hey, Earth needed someone who could keep a straight face while listening to intergalactic nonsense, and apparently I was their guy. The Zephyrian Empire's diplomatic corps had arranged this little powwow on Neutral Station 7, a spinning metal donut that looked like someone had taken a space station and put it through a blender with a five-star hotel. Everything was chrome and crystal, designed to make visitors feel appropriately intimidated. The Zephyrians loved their intimidation tactics almost as much as they loved their ridiculous names. Admiral Clix was the lead negotiator, a 7-foot-tall purple mantis wearing what I can only describe as a military uniform designed by someone who thought shoulder pads were a good idea but didn't know when to stop. His 3 eyes kept rotating independently, which would have been impressive if it wasn't so clearly meant to unnerve me. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Ambassador Morrison, Clix began, his voice carrying that particular tone aliens used when they thought they were talking to a particularly slow child. We appreciate that your species has enthusiasm for joining galactic civilization. However, we must address some concerns. I leaned back in my chair, which was probably worth more than my house back on Earth, and smiled. Oh, do tell. I'm just dying to hear what concerns the mighty Zephyrian Empire has about little old humanity. The other diplomats exchanged what I assumed were meaningful glances. There was Vex, a blob-like creature that communicated through color changes and probably thought it was being subtle. Next to him sat Commander Thrak, who looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a filing cabinet and given it anger management issues. The usual suspects from what humanity had started calling the cosmic Hoa. Your species, Clix continued, apparently missing my sarcasm entirely, has shown a disturbing tendency toward violence. Your historical records are filled with conflicts, wars, and what you call creative problem-solving that often involves significant property damage. Guilty as charged, I said, taking a sip of what passed for coffee in this part of the galaxy. It tasted like regret and artificial vanilla, but it was caffeinated, so I wasn't complaining. Though I'd argue that most of our wars were fought with admirable efficiency. X pulsed an alarming shade of orange, which I'd learned meant either confusion or digestive distress. Efficiency is not the point, Ambassador. The galactic community values peace, cooperation, and civilized discourse. Right, I nodded sagely. Which is why you're all armed to the teeth and maintain standing armies larger than our entire population. Very peaceful of you. Commander Thrak's metallic hide rattled, which was either laughter or the sound of his patience wearing thin. Ambassador Morrison, your species' military capabilities are quaint. We understand that humans feel the need to play at being soldiers, but surely you realize that in the grand scheme of galactic affairs, your forces are merely ceremonial. Now that was interesting. The galactic community had spent the last 50 years treating humanity like we were dangerous enough to warrant constant supervision, but apparently, they'd also convinced themselves we were too primitive to be a real threat. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. Oh, absolutely. I agreed with a grin that probably didn't reach my eyes. We're basically space Boy Scouts with delusions of grandeur. Just ask anyone who's looked at our adorable little fleet of research vessels and mining platforms. The way Clix's mandibles clicked together suggested he was either pleased or about to molt. With insects, it was always hard to tell. Admiral Clix stood up, which was apparently the galactic equivalent of clearing your throat dramatically. His uniform somehow managed to look even more ridiculous when he was at full height, like someone had upholstered a praying mantis in military surplus. Ambassador Morrison, he began, his voice taking on what I can only describe as a lecturing a toddler tone. The Zephyrian Empire has a proposition for your species. I'm all ears, I said, gesturing to the sides of my head. Well, 2 ears. I know some of you folks have more, but we make do with what we've got. The color-changing blob that was Vex shifted to a deeper purple, which I'd learned meant either deep thought or mild indigestion. The proposition is simple, Ambassador. humanity will surrender operational control of all military assets to the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. In exchange, your species will receive full protection under our collective security agreements. I blinked slowly, processing what I'd just heard. Let me see if I've got this right. You want us to hand over our military because you'll protect us better than we can protect ourselves. Precisely, Commander Thrak rumbled, his filing cabinet meets rhinoceros form shifting with what might have been satisfaction. Your species' tendency toward violence makes you a liability in civilized space. We're offering you the chance to join galactic society without the burden of maintaining your own defense forces. How generous, I said, my voice flatter than a roadkill pancake. And if we decline this incredibly reasonable offer? Clix's three eyes stopped their independent rotation and focused on me with laser-like intensity. Then the Zephyrian Empire will be forced to take steps to ensure galactic stability. Your colonies exist at our sufferance, Ambassador. We would hate for that sufferance to be withdrawn. The threat hung in the air like a bad smell. I took another sip of my terrible coffee and considered my options. Option 1, tell them exactly what I thought of their proposal in terms that would make a space pirate blush. Option 2, continue playing the role of the bumbling human diplomat until I could figure out their angle. I went with option 2. For now. That's quite a deadline you're giving us, I said mildly. How long do we have to consider this generous offer? 72 standard hours, Clix replied. We believe that's sufficient time for your leadership to make the correct decision. Oh, I'm sure Earth's leadership will be very interested in your proposal, I said, pulling out my communication device. Mind if I record this conversation? Just want to make sure I get all the details right when I report back. The aliens exchanged glances again. Vex pulsed a sickly yellow color that I was pretty sure meant nervous or about to be sick. Commander Thrak's hide plates rattled in what was definitely not laughter this time. That won't be necessary, Clix said quickly. We've already transmitted the formal proposal to your government through proper channels. How thoughtful, I said, but I kept recording anyway. So let me make sure I understand the timeline here. You've given us 3 days to disarm completely, after which you'll, what's the phrase, withdraw your sufferance if we don't comply. Correct. And you're confident that humanity will make the right choice? Clix's mandibles clicked in what I was learning to recognize as his version of a smug smile. Ambassador, we've already tested your species' resolve. Your colony on New Geneva received a demonstration of Zephyrian military capabilities 48 hours ago. The response was disappointing but predictable. Every muscle in my body went very still. I'm sorry, what did you just say? The civilian target we selected proved that humans, despite their reputation for violence, are ultimately quite reasonable when faced with superior force. No military response, no declarations of war, just the expected political posturing and calls for diplomatic solutions. The room suddenly felt very cold. What civilian target? Commander Thrak's hide plates rattled again, definitely with amusement this time. The orphanage, Ambassador. We felt it would send a clear message about the consequences of defying galactic authority. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. My hand wasn't shaking, which was impressive considering what I was hearing. You bombed an orphanage. A demonstration of force, Clix corrected. 347 casualties. Quite efficient, really. I looked around the room at the faces of the various alien diplomats. They were all watching me with expressions that ranged from smug satisfaction to mild curiosity. None of them seemed to think they'd just admitted to mass murder. 347 children, I said slowly. The exact number is irrelevant, Vex pulsed a confident orange. What matters is that your species now understands the cost of defiance. That's when I smiled. Not the diplomatic smile I'd been wearing for the past hour, but something else entirely. Something that made Clix's three eyes suddenly stop their rotation and focus on me with what might have been alarm. Oh, I said, reaching for my secure communication device, I think you'll find that humanity understands the cost of defiance much better than you think. The communication device in my hand felt heavier than it should have, like it was made of lead instead of whatever miracle materials Earth's tech division had cobbled together. I activated the emergency protocol and felt the familiar tingle of quantum encryption kicking in. "This is Ambassador Morrison to Earth Command," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my world had just tilted about 45 degrees off its axis. "Priority Alpha. Requesting immediate connection to General Hayes." The aliens around the table were starting to look less smug and more confused. Clix's mandibles were twitching in what I was pretty sure was the insect equivalent of, oh. "Ambassador," Vex pulsed a nervous yellow, "surely there's no need for." "Oh, there's a need," I interrupted, my diplomatic smile having completely evaporated. 347 children's worth of need. The device crackled to life, and suddenly General Rita Hayes' voice filled the conference room. "If you've never heard Bulldozer Hayes talk, imagine what would happen if you gave a drill sergeant a doctorate in tactical warfare and then told her that someone had just kicked her favorite puppy. Tank, what's your status?" she demanded without preamble. "General," I said, still looking directly at Admiral Clix, "I'm sitting in a room with the diplomatic corps of the Zephyrian Empire. They just informed me that they conducted a demonstration of force on New Geneva, the orphanage. They're claiming 347 casualties." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens right before a storm hits. You know the one I'm talking about. The kind where the air gets thick and your ears start to ring and every instinct you have starts screaming at you to find cover. "Confirm that last transmission," Hayes said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to be more terrifying than if she'd been screaming. "Confirmed. They bombed the St. Catherine's Home for Children and they're treating it like a successful negotiation tactic." Another pause. Then, "Are you in immediate danger, Ambassador?" I looked around the room at the collection of alien diplomats who were now starting to look like they might be regretting their life choices. "Not at the moment, General. They seem to think they've got the upper hand." "Copy that. Ambassador Morrison, you are authorized to inform the Zephyrian Empire that their demonstration has been received and understood. Please convey to them that humanity will be responding in kind." Admiral Clix's three eyes started rotating again, but this time it looked more like panic than intimidation. "Ambassador, surely your leadership understands that any aggressive response would be futile. The Zephyrian Empire commands a fleet of over 10,000. "General," I interrupted, "Admiral Clix would like you to know that they have 10,000 ships and they think any response from us would be futile." The laugh that came through the communication device was not a pleasant sound. It was the kind of laugh that belongs in horror movies, right before something very bad happens to someone who probably deserves it. "Please inform Admiral Clix," Hayes said, "that we appreciate his confidence in his fleet. Also inform him that Protocol Omega has been authorized." I felt my eyebrows climb toward my hairline. Protocol Omega wasn't something I'd ever expected to hear activated outside of a training simulation. "General, confirming authorization for Protocol Omega." "Confirmed. All assets are being deployed as of this moment. Ambassador, I recommend you find somewhere comfortable to watch the show." The connection cut off, leaving me alone with a room full of increasingly nervous aliens. I set the device down carefully and picked up my coffee cup again, taking a sip of the terrible brew while I considered my next words. "So," I said conversationally, "I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that Earth's leadership has received your message loud and clear. The bad news is that they're going to respond with the same clarity you used when you murdered 347 children." Commander Thrax's hide plates were rattling continuously now, which I was pretty sure meant extreme agitation or about to molt from stress. "Ambassador, your species' military capabilities are insufficient to threaten the Zephyrian Empire. This is a documented fact." "You know what?" I said, finishing my coffee and setting the cup down with a satisfied sigh. "You're absolutely right. Our military capabilities are exactly what you think they are. We're just a bunch of primitive humans with delusions of grandeur and toy soldiers." I stood up, straightening my jacket with deliberate care. "The problem is, nobody ever bothered to ask what we've been researching all these years while you were busy being condescending." Vex had turned a shade of purple that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist in nature. What do you mean? I said, walking over to the conference room's massive viewport, that you're about to find out why humans have a reputation for violence, and why we've spent the last 50 years smiling and nodding while you treated us like children. Outside the viewport, space looked exactly the same as it always did. Stars twinkling in the distance, the slow rotation of the station creating the illusion of movement, the peaceful emptiness of the void. For now. Mkau. The thing about space is that it's really, really big. So when General Hayes said all assets are being deployed, I expected it to take a while before anything visible happened. What I didn't expect was for my communication device to chirp with an incoming message exactly 17 minutes later. Ambassador Morrison, came Hayes' voice, accompanied by what sounded like the background noise of a very busy command center. Please direct the attention of our alien friends to the viewport. Show's about to start. I gestured toward the massive transparent aluminum window that made up one wall of the conference room. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms, if you'd care to observe the demonstration Earth has prepared for you. The aliens clustered around the viewport like tourists at an aquarium. Admiral Clix's 3 eyes were doing their independent rotation thing again, scanning the star field for whatever humanity might be bringing to the party. I see nothing, Commander Thrak rumbled, his filing cabinet physique somehow managing to convey skepticism. Give it a moment, I said, checking my watch. Earth's always been big on punctuality. That's when space started to fold. I don't know if you've ever seen a quantum jump drive in operation, but it's not subtle. Reality sort of wrinkles around the edges, like someone's taking a photograph of the universe and crumpling it up. Then there's a flash of light that makes you want to blink, and suddenly there's something there that wasn't there before. In this case, that something was the Earth Defense Force flagship Righteous Fury, a ship that officially didn't exist and unofficially happened to be the size of a small city. "Huh," I said, pressing my nose against the viewport. "That's not a research vessel." Vex had turned a color that I'm pretty sure meant existential crisis or about to faint. "That's impossible. Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity possessed no vessels larger than—" "Our intelligence reports were very thorough," I interrupted. "We made sure of that." More wrinkles in space. More flashes of light. More ships that officially didn't exist materializing out of nowhere. The scientific endeavor, which looked like someone had taken a weapons platform and disguised it as a mobile laboratory. The peaceful explorer, which was bristling with enough firepower to level a small moon. The diplomatic solution, which was apparently humanity's idea of a practical joke. "How many ships do you have?" Clix asked, his voice climbing toward what I assumed was panic in his species. "Oh, we don't have any ships," I said cheerfully. "These are all research vessels and civilian craft. You said so yourself. We're just a bunch of primitive humans with toy soldiers, remember?" My communication device chirped again. This time it was a different voice, one I recognized as belonging to Admiral Marcus Webb, commander of the ship that definitely wasn't called the Righteous Fury. "Ambassador Morrison, this is Admiral Webb aboard the research vessel Righteous Fury. We're receiving reports of hostile action against civilian targets. Can you confirm?" I looked at the collection of increasingly pale aliens around me. "Confirmed, Admiral. The Zephyrian Empire has claimed responsibility for the bombing of St. Catherine's Home for Children. They considered it a demonstration of superior firepower." "Copy that, Ambassador. Please inform the Zephyrian representatives that we'll be conducting our own demonstration shortly. We've identified 17 military installations, 43 strategic resources, and one particularly impressive command ship that we'd like to use for educational purposes." Through the viewport, I could see the Zephyrian fleet beginning to move. Their ships were sleek and dangerous looking, like someone had crossed a sword with a spaceship and added racing stripes. They looked fast and deadly and completely outclassed. "Admiral," I said into the communicator, "it appears the Zephyrian fleet is moving to engage." "Acknowledged. Ambassador, you might want to suggest that our alien friends avoid looking directly at the educational demonstrations. We'd hate for anyone to suffer retinal damage." I turned to the room full of diplomats, who were now pressing themselves against the viewport like they were watching the end of the world, which, from their perspective, they probably were. "Gentlemen," I said, "I'd like to present humanity's response to your diplomatic overture. Please note that this is what we call a proportional response. We could have gone with disproportional, but we thought we'd start small." The first Zephyrian ship to engage the righteous fury lasted approximately 6 seconds. It approached with what I'm sure was intended to be intimidating speed, fired what were probably supposed to be devastating weapons, and then disappeared in a flash of light that looked like someone had detonated a small star. "Fascinating." Admiral Webb's voice came through the communicator. "Their energy weapons appear to be based on focused plasma technology, quite advanced for their apparent technological level." A second Zephyrian ship met the same fate. Then a third. Of course, Webb continued in the same conversational tone. "They don't seem to have developed adequate shielding against gravitational manipulation, or temporal displacement, or quantum decoherence fields. Honestly, it's like they've never seen a proper physics textbook." Commander Thrax's hide plates were now rattling so hard he sounded like a mechanical percussion section. "This is impossible. Our ships are equipped with the most advanced." "We're equipped," I corrected. Past tense, present tense. They're equipped with a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The Zephyrian fleet, which had seemed so impressive when it first appeared, was now in full retreat. Not that it was doing them much good. The human ships were moving with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested this was less like a battle and more like a training exercise. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said, watching another Zephyrian cruiser get reduced to its component atoms. "You were right about us being violent. We really are. We just prefer to be violent efficiently. The thing about watching a space battle is that it's nothing like the movies. There's no sound, obviously, since space is a vacuum and all that. But there's also no dramatic music, no slow-motion sequences, and definitely no last-minute heroic speeches. What there is a lot of very bright lights and the kind of mathematical precision that makes accountants weep with joy." "Current score," I announced to the room like I was calling a sports match. "Humanity 47, Zephyrian Empire 0. It looks like the diplomatic solution is moving to intercept their command ship. That's gotta hurt." My Admiral Clix had gone completely still, which for an insect like Alien was particularly unsettling. All three of his eyes were focused on the viewport, watching his proud fleet get systematically dismantled by what he'd called primitive humans with toy soldiers. "This is not possible," he whispered. "Our intelligence indicated." "Your intelligence was exactly what we wanted it to be," I interrupted. "Did you really think we'd spend 50 years in space and not figure out how to manage information flow? We're humans. We invented paranoia, conspiracy theories, and the concept of need to know. Managing what you knew about us was child's play." Commander Thrax's hide plates had stopped rattling, which was somehow more ominous than when they were making noise. "Your species lied to us." "Our species," I said, taking a moment to appreciate the irony, "told you exactly what you wanted to hear. You wanted to believe we were primitive, so we acted primitive. You wanted to believe we were peaceful, so we talked about peace. You wanted to believe our military was a joke, so we made sure our military looked like a joke." Through the viewport, I could see the righteous fury moving toward what remained of the Zephyrian command ship. It was like watching a shark approach a goldfish, if the shark was the size of a city and the goldfish was armed with weapons that could level mountains. "Ambassador Morrison," Admiral Webb's voice came through the communicator. "We're receiving surrender signals from the remaining Zephyrian vessels. How would you like us to proceed?" I looked at the collection of alien diplomats, who were now looking at me like I just revealed that I was actually 3 children in a trench coat. "What's the current casualty count, Admiral?" "Zephyrian military casualties are approaching 15,000. Human casualties remain at 0. "And their civilian casualties?" "None, Ambassador. We've been very careful to target only military assets, but—" I nodded slowly. "Admiral, please inform the Zephyrian fleet that we're prepared to accept their surrender." Also inform them that any further aggressive action will result in us demonstrating what we call disproportional response. Vex had turned a shade of green that I'm pretty sure meant about to be violently ill. Ambassador, surely your species doesn't intend to. Oh, we intend to do exactly what you did, I said, my voice losing every trace of diplomatic politeness. You want to play the game where we target civilian populations? Let's play that game. I'm sure we can find a few orphanages in Zephyrian space. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when everyone in the room suddenly realizes they've made a terrible mistake. The kind of silence that comes right before someone starts begging for mercy. However, I continued, unlike some species I could mention, we actually have standards. So we're going to accept your surrender, process your surviving military personnel according to the Galactic Conventions on Warfare, and then we're going to have a conversation about reparations. Admiral Clix's mandibles were clicking so rapidly it sounded like castanets. Reparations? 347 children, I said simply. Each one of them had a name, a life, dreams they'll never get to pursue. So yes, reparations. Think of it as a learning experience. My communication device chirped again. This time it was General Hayes. Ambassador, we're receiving surrender signals from Zephyrian installations throughout their territory. It appears their entire military structure was more centralized than we anticipated. Any word from their civilian government? They're requesting immediate negotiations, something about preventing further misunderstandings. I looked around the room at the alien diplomats, who were now looking at me like I was some kind of natural disaster that had just learned to wear a suit. Tell them we'll be happy to negotiate, I said. But this time, we're going to have the conversation as equals. And General? Yes, Ambassador? Make sure they understand that this was us being restrained. If they ever target human civilians again, we'll show them what disproportional response actually means. The connection cut off, leaving me alone with a room full of aliens who were just beginning to understand that they'd spent the last 50 years poking a sleeping dragon with a stick. So, I said cheerfully, anyone want to discuss those reparations? 3 hours later, I was sitting in the same conference room, but the atmosphere had changed considerably. The aliens who had been treating me like a particularly slow kindergartner were now hanging on my every word like I was some kind of prophet of doom. Which from their perspective I probably was. Admiral Clix had been replaced by someone calling himself Negotiator Prime Zeth, who looked like Admiral Clix but with more gold braiding and a lot more nervous energy. The other alien representatives had been swapped out for what I assumed were more senior diplomats, all of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Ambassador Morrison, Negotiator Prime Zeth began, his voice carrying the kind of careful politeness that people use when they're afraid you might eat them. The Zephyrian Empire would like to formally apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the civilian facility on New Geneva. Misunderstanding, I repeated, tasting the word like it was something unpleasant. Is that what we're calling the deliberate targeting of an orphanage now? The officer responsible has been relieved of duty, Zeth continued, his three eyes rotating independently in what I was learning to recognize as extreme nervousness. We assure you that such actions were not authorized by the civilian government. Aha, I said, leaning back in my chair. And I suppose the officer responsible for authorizing the bombing of children just happened to be in this room 3 hours ago? Making threats about withdrawing your sufferance from human colonies? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they've been caught red-handed, or red mandible, or whatever the equivalent was for purple insect people. The Zephyrian Empire, Zeth said carefully, is prepared to offer substantial reparations for the tragic loss of life. We're also prepared to formally recognize human territorial claims and military sovereignty. How generous, I said. And I suppose this sudden change of heart has nothing to do with the fact that your entire fleet is currently floating in space as debris. The Zephyrian Empire values peace above all else, Zeth replied, which would have been more convincing if his species hadn't just spent the last few hours threatening to wipe out human colonies. My communication device chirped, and General Hayes' voice filled the room. Ambassador, we're receiving similar offers from the Craxian Hegemony, the Vorthan Republic, and the Galactic Trade Consortium. Seems news travels fast in this part of the galaxy. Any word from the Galactic Council? They're calling for an emergency session. Something about reassessing humanity's role in galactic affairs. They sound nervous. I couldn't help but smile. I bet they do. General, what's the status of our fleet? All ships are maintaining position. We're also receiving requests for military assistance from about a dozen minor species who apparently have some grievances with their neighbors. Interesting. It seems our reputation for violence is spreading. Ambassador, Zeth interrupted. Surely humanity doesn't intend to become involved in other species' conflicts? I turned to look at him, and I must have been smiling, because all three of his eyes immediately stopped rotating and focused on me with what looked like terror. Negotiator Prime Zeth, I said, let me explain something about human nature. We really don't like bullies. And from what I'm hearing, this galaxy is full of them. Humanity cannot police the entire galaxy, protested the new Vorthan representative, a crystalline creature that looked like someone had taught a chandelier to walk. You're absolutely right, I agreed. We can't police the entire galaxy, but we can make sure that anyone who thinks it's acceptable to target civilians gets a very expensive education and why that's a bad idea. I stood up, straightening my jacket with the same deliberate care I'd used earlier. Here's how this is going to work. The Galactic Council is going to formally recognize humanity as a member species with full voting rights. The various empires and hegemonies are going to stop threatening smaller species with extinction. And everyone is going to understand that if you target civilians, you're going to have to explain your actions to people who grew up watching war movies and playing strategy games. And if we refuse? Asked the Craxian representative, a slug-like creature that somehow managed to look skeptical despite not having a face. Then you'll get to find out what humans are like when we're not being diplomatic, I said. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty. My communication device chirped again. This time it was Admiral Webb. Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting your immediate presence at an emergency session. Copy that, Admiral. How long until we can reach the council chambers? The righteous fury can have you there in 6 hours, Ambassador. I looked around the room at the collection of alien diplomats, who were now looking at me like I was some kind of cosmic force of nature that had just learned to wear a suit. Gentlemen, I said, it's been a pleasure. I trust that when I return from my meeting with the Galactic Council, we'll have a more productive conversation about reparations, territorial rights, and the new galactic order. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and just so we're clear, I said, this was us being nice. We could have started with the planet crackers, but we thought we'd try diplomacy first. You know, for old time's sake. The door slid shut behind me, leaving me alone in the corridor with the sound of my own footsteps and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Behind me, I could hear the aliens beginning to talk in hushed, urgent tones. They were probably discussing damage control, or maybe wondering how they'd managed to mistake the most dangerous species in the galaxy for a bunch of primitive savages. But that was their problem now. I had a meeting with the Galactic Council, and I was pretty sure it was going to be the most interesting conversation in the history of interstellar diplomacy. After all, it's not every day that the cosmic kindergartners grow up and decide to run the playground.